a reputation on product placement yet.
Somebody's got it somewhere.
Coming up.
Alright. Hello, I'm Shane, and I will be refuting Victoria's speech on sexism in tennis. The advocate's main claim is that the referees are more critical to women in tennis. Her secondary claims are that the tennis dress code for women is strictly enforced more than men, and the rules of etiquette in tennis are inconsistent, and women are heavily penalized more than men. I'm standing before you today to tell you that men can be as criticized in tennis, much like women. Umpires and referees can be critical to any player regardless of gender, and it's usually because of unprofessional behavior. My first refutatory claim is that the dress code is strictly enforced on men and women despite their physical differences. Ben Rothenberg, a journalist for the New York Times, inscribed in a report titled, "All white is the style, whether the players appreciate it or not." Martina Navratilova, I'm sorry, I do not know how to pronounce that name. Martina, a 9-time Wimbledon champion, was told that the pale blue stripe on the skirt she was wearing for an invitational doubles match was against the rules. Navratilova questioned how a tradition was being upheld if the type of clothing she had been allowed to wear for decades, some of which is in the Wimbledon Museum, was suddenly forbidden. This validates that players like Navratilova agree that it's infuriating to be forced to wear 100% white clothes for a Wimbledon match. But rules are rules, and players have to follow them or risk losing their participation in Wimbledon. Reza Brunner, a writer for Time magazine, stated in an article titled, "Why Wimbledon Players Have to Wear All White." During the Victorian era, it was all about being incredibly proper. According to Meredith Richards, the librarian at the International Tennis Hall of Fame, it was actually considered improper to sweat. This certifies that even in the 21st century, every player must follow the Victorian tradition of wearing all white clothes and not being able to sweat in those clothes. It's impossible not to sweat because of the excessive heat, and that's what humans do, but Wimbledon insists that tradition stays. The rules of tennis are disrupted rather than inconsistent. Howard French, a journalist for Bangor Daily News Tennis, wrote in a report about Serena Williams being fined $17,000 for rules violations. Under Article 3, Section P of the Grand Slam rulebook, verbal abuse is defined as a statement about an official, opponent, sponsor, spectator, or other person that implies dishonesty or is derogatory, insulting, or otherwise abusive. This particular section from the Grand Slam rulebook verifies that Williams behaved unprofessionally and was given a punishment that she still would have gotten even if she were a man. Russell Fuller, a reporter for the BBC Sports, asks in his article titled, "US Open, there's sexism in tennis, but that doesn't excuse Serena Williams' behavior. Do umpires show more leniency than to men? There is no strong evidence from this US Open, and the Italian Fabio Fognini was fined $96,000 and given a suspended Grand Slam ban for verbal abuse at last year's offense. This proves that every player, male and female, can be harshly fined or suspended if they step out of line. If Serena Williams had continued to display improper behavior, then she would have been suspended from the US Open, much like Fabio Fognini. Men are bigger subject to violation fines than women." Christopher Clary, another writer who works for the New York Times, transcribes in it, "Men have been fined 646 times for racket abuse and 287 times for unsportsmanlike conduct. Women have been fined 99 times for racket abuse and 67 times for unsportsmanlike conduct. Because fines are the result of an investigation by the referee due to code of conduct violations, either for smashing, male and female players can be fined for if they make any violation, either for smashing a racket or for being a bad sport. In conclusion, the dress code is equally unfair to both genders. The rules of tennis are improperly followed, and men are more likely to be fined for violations than women. Thank you. Glossed over some of them, but hey, let's still.
Good job.
Thank you.
All right, Shane, you indicated what the advocate's claims were pretty clearly. At the beginning, you went right after the dress code, which made perfect sense. You do give us a little bit more history lesson than we probably need about the Victorian era, and I don't think anybody expects people not to sweat, you're right. But that doesn't mean that they aren't expected to wear the all-white outfits that are de rigueur and expected in that particular situation. The Martina Navratilova example of her outfits being in the Wimbledon Museum. I'm not sure if they were in the museum, if they were things that she wore during the tournament there at Wimbledon. They might have been other places. So I appreciate the point that's being made here that it does seem inconsistent, but it's inconsistent in the tournament itself. That's where the rule is, and that's where it's being applied. And I thought that you were pretty effective explaining that. I don't know that puts it in the context of what happened with Serena in this particular case, and I think that there needed to be a little bit more discussion of the events that
the catsuit that she wore.
Yeah, that the advocate was talking about. There may be some discrepancy, and I'm not sure that it was all about Wimbledon. It may have been some other things that were going on as well. I think you have a second point on the behavior issues, and I know that you labeled behavior issues. I didn't really get the numerical signpost there. That's kind of talking about some of those fines that are taking place, and I thought that you had some really good information here about. Well, you had a counterexample about the fine that went to the one Italian player, and it included a ban later on. Yeah, I don't want, if you had trouble with Navratilova, I'm going to have trouble with the Italian name, and I don't know the name. Navratilova I've heard for 40 plus years.
I've never even heard of that name.
Yeah,
or
well,
Fabio Fognini.
Oh, Fognini, okay, well, let me work on that one. I'll put it in my repertoire of Italian tennis players that I can name. Now I've got one. All right. But the statistic, the example of the fine that he paid and the ban for Grand Slam events, I thought that was pretty effective at showing that, in fact, men do get penalized, and it is substantial. I didn't really get the contrast to what Serena did in this particular situation. I don't remember what her fine consisted of, and whether or not she apparently didn't cross the line to get the subsequent ban. So the notion that people are not treated the same way seems to be dispelled a little bit by a counterexample here, undermining the generalization to some degree. The piece of information that I thought you dug the most to get was about the number of infractions for racket abuse and for the other unspecified kinds of abuse, and you had nice comparisons of the statistical data between men and women, and I thought that was pretty solid. And I also appreciated the fact that you gave source citations and qualified it for all of those sources, so that was solid too.
I have it in the bibliography, and I remembered what you said about indents